The Andromeda Collective prided itself on being the pinnacle of civilized society. Across 700 star systems, species had evolved past barbarism, past conflict, past the primitive notion that survival required anything more strenuous than existing. Their worlds were gardens of tranquility, where the most dangerous predator might give you a stern look before wandering off to contemplate philosophy. Weather was a quaint concept their ancestors had conquered millennia ago. Disease? Please. They'd solved that problem before they'd figured out faster-than-light travel, which made the Celestial Harmonics Academy the crown jewel of their educational system, a space station orbiting the peaceful world of Velnara, where the offspring of diplomats, scientists, and various galactic elite gathered to learn about art, mathematics, and the 17,000 proper ways to decline an invitation to a social gathering without causing intergalactic incidents. The station maintained perfect temperature control, artificial gravity set to the collective standard of 0.6 Earth normal, and an atmosphere so pristine you could package it and sell it as a luxury product. Which someone probably did. Into this bubble of cosmic privilege had arrived 3 months prior, a transfer student from a world the administration had filed under Developing Civilizations, handle with patronizing care. The student in question sat in advanced astrophysics, her posture relaxed in a way that made the Velnari students uncomfortable. There was something unsettling about how still she could be, like a predator conserving energy, though none of them had enough experience with predators to make that connection. Her name was Kira Chen, though she'd learned quickly that most of her classmates struggled with human naming conventions and had simply started calling her the Terran, in that special tone reserved for discussing someone's embarrassing relatives. Perhaps the Terran can enlighten us, Professor Zil-Inth chittered, his crystalline form refracting light in what his species considered a knowing smile. If she's been paying attention, rather than daydreaming about whatever primitive amusements her world offers. Kira looked up from her tablet, where she'd been 3 chapters ahead in the textbook, because the class moved at a pace that made continental drift look rapid. You're asking about the gravitational constant derivation? If it's not too complex for your developing neural pathways. Several students emitted their species' equivalent of snickering. The sound was like wind chimes having a passive-aggressive argument. The derivation assumes a uniform gravitational field, which works fine for your demonstration. But in practical applications near neutron stars or within planetary magnetospheres, you'd need to account for tidal forces and frame-dragging effects. The equation on the board would give you answers that are off by about 15% in those conditions. Shihyo delivered this in the same tone someone might use to mention it was raining outside. The classroom fell silent. Professor Zil-Inth's crystalline structure flickered through several colors that indicated confusion, then irritation, then grudging acknowledgement. That is technically correct, though I doubt you'll encounter such conditions in your future endeavors. Kira didn't mention that her high school physics class on Earth had included a field trip to study tidal effects in the Mediterranean, which involved more gravitational variation than most collective species experienced in their entire lives. After class, as students filed out in their orderly, civilized manner, 3 figures blocked the corridor. Zixal, a Threnodian whose species resembled what would happen if an octopus and a philosophy textbook had a child, flanked by his 2 constant companions. Quela, whose 4-armed Nexian form towered at nearly 7 feet, and Rith, a Kalmari whose toxic skin patterns pulsed with bioluminescent superiority. The primitive shows off again. Zixal's translator rendered his clicks into standard galactic. Tell me, Terran, did your keeper help you memorize those words? Keeper? Kira adjusted her bag, which weighed 40 pounds, and which she carried as easily as her classmates carried their styluses. Your species handler, the adult assigned to ensure you don't embarrass yourself or, ancestors forbid, break something. We know Earth isn't actually part of the collective. You're what's the term? A charity case? This wasn't new. It had started her first week with subtle exclusions, escalated to accidental spillages of beverages on her work, and had recently graduated to open mockery. Kira had dealt with worse in her middle school in Houston, where at least the bullies had the excuse of being 13 and hopped up on hormones and cafeteria pizza. "If you're done," she said, "I have xenobiology in 10 minutes. Quella's manipulator appendage shot out, not quite touching Kira, but blocking her path. In collective space, this was considered aggressive. "We're not done. You see, there's a social hierarchy here, primitive. Your kind might not understand such concepts, but in civilized society, there are those who lead and those who follow. And refugees from backwater systems definitely follow." "Backwater," Kira repeated. "Right. Your world isn't even Class 5 civilized. No climate control, no unified government, still using chemical propulsion for most applications. You probably grew up dodging whatever passes for weather in your savage little corner of the galaxy. If only they knew that dodging weather on Earth meant everything from hurricanes that could flatten cities to temperature swings that would kill most collective species in hours." But Kira had learned that explaining Earth's conditions usually resulted in accusations of exaggeration. "Can I go now?" "When we dismiss you." Zixal's tentacles writhed in what his species considered a dominant display. On Earth, it would have looked like a pool noodle having an existential crisis. "Perhaps if you asked nicely. On your knees? That's a submissive posture for your species, correct?" Something flickered in Kira's eyes, a calculation happening in milliseconds. She'd been patient. She'd been diplomatic. She'd followed every guideline the Earth Embassy had provided about not causing incidents. But there were limits. And more importantly, there were principles her father, a Marine Corps veteran, had drilled into her. Don't start fights, but don't let people walk on you either. "Move," she said quietly. "Or what?" Quayla leaned forward, all four arms spread in an intimidation display that probably worked great on other Nexians. What will the little primitive do? What happened next took 1.3 seconds. Kira shifted her weight, placed one hand on Quella's center torso, and pushed. Not hard by Earth standards, just a firm shove. The kind you might give a friend who was hogging the bathroom. Quayla went flying backward 15 feet, slammed into the corridor wall with enough force to crack the decorative panel, and slid down in a tangle of limbs, wheezing. The silence was profound. "She's armed," Rith shrieked, backing away so fast his toxic skin patterns went pale. "I'm not armed." Kira held up her empty hands. "That was just my hand." "Impossible," Zixal whispered. "You're half her size. Nexians are strength rated for 0.6 standard gravity at..." "Yeah, about that?" Kira interrupted. "What's your station gravity set to?" 0.6 standard, obviously. Optimal for Earth's gravity is 1.6 times that. I've been walking around here for 3 months, feeling like I'm on the moon, which, actually, I have been. On the moon, I mean. Field trip, 6th grade. They stared at her. "So when I push something," Kira continued in that same reasonable tone, "I'm pushing with muscles that evolved to operate in gravity nearly 3 times what you're used to. Make sense?" Before anyone could respond, Security Officer Plenick rounded the corner, his sensor array picking up the damaged wall panel and distressed students. Plenick was a harmonizer, a species bioengineered for peacekeeping, which meant he was very good at stern looks and very bad at actual conflict. What's happening here? She attacked Quella. Rith pointed with a trembling appendage. Unprovoked violence, barbaric assault. Kira sighed. They blocked my path and threatened me. I removed the obstacle. By throwing her across the corridor. I pushed her. There's a difference. Officer Plennick's anterior sensors focused on Kira with new intensity. Student. That is a Nexian. They're classified as megafauna. Their bone density alone is probably adorable by Earth standards. Kira finished. Look, are we doing this here or should we go to administration? Because I've got xenobiology and I really don't want to miss the lecture on parallel evolution in silicon-based life forms. What followed was 3 hours in administrative detention, which was less like detention and more like a spa where people asked you disappointed questions. Vice Principal Thorax, whose species resembled a floating jellyfish made of bureaucratic concern, reviewed footage from the corridor sensors with increasing agitation. Miss Chen, he said, using her actual name for the first time in their acquaintance. Do you understand the severity of what occurred? I defended myself after repeated harassment and a physical threat. You injured another student. She'll be fine. Bruised ribs, maybe. Your medical tech is pretty advanced. That's not the point. Thorax's tendrils quivered. You used force. Physical force. We haven't had an incident of actual physical violence in this institution in 47 years. Congratulations. This is not a joke. Your species' propensity for violence is exactly why Earth's application for collective membership has been delayed. And now you've confirmed every concern the Council has about human integration. Kira leaned back in her chair, which creaked under what the collective considered excessive weight. Let me get this straight. I've been harassed for 3 months. I've reported it 5 times. Nothing happened. Today they physically blocked me, threatened me, and demanded I kneel. I pushed one of them. And I'm the problem? You could have hurt her seriously. But I didn't. Because unlike what you seem to think, humans have this neat thing called impulse control. I used exactly enough force to make my point without causing real damage. If I'd wanted to hurt her, trust me, you'd know. The way she said it, flat and factual, made Thorax's floating form sink several inches. What? What do you mean? Kira pulled up her personal tablet and started flicking through files. Okay, so, fun fact. Earth isn't classified in your database correctly. You've got us listed as a Class 3 developing world, right? That's correct. Cool. Except Earth is actually a Class 12 death world. Your classifiers didn't dig deep enough into the survey data, probably because the initial contact team thought our diplomats were exaggerating for effect. A Class 12... Thorax's color shifted to something that indicated disbelief. Those classifications are for planets with extreme environmental hazards, toxic atmospheres, lethal radiation, predator saturation. Check the file. Kira spun the tablet around. What Thorax saw made his entire form ripple with distress. Earth's atmosphere contained 21% free oxygen, a concentration that would be considered mildly poisonous to most collective species. The planet's surface gravity was 9.8 meters per second squared, requiring bones 3 times as dense as standard for basic function. Temperature variations regularly exceeded 50 degrees Celsius between seasons in inhabited zones. The oceans contained dissolved salt and were home to creatures that could swallow collective, vessels whole. The land masses featured weather systems capable of generating wind speeds that exceeded most species' spacecraft velocities. Active volcanism, tectonic instability, asteroid strikes, ice ages occurring on a geological regularity that suggested the planet was actively trying to murder its inhabitants. And the predators. Oh, the predators. Your world has bears? Thorax's voice synthesizer struggled with the concept. Animals that weigh 700 kilograms, can run 50 kilometers per hour, and attack for territorial reasons? Those are the smaller ones. We've got apex predators in the oceans that can bite through steel. We've got pack hunters that can run down prey for hours. We've got ambush predators with venom that causes paralysis. We've got parasites that eat you from the inside. We've got plants that cause chemical burns if you touch them. We've got insects that carry diseases that killed millions of us before we figured out medicine. But you're so small, so soft. Yeah, because we're endurance hunters. We don't need armor. We chase things until they collapse from exhaustion, then we poke them with sharp sticks. We evolved to survive on a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill us in creative ways. So we got creative right back. Thorax was scrolling through the file now, his form flickering through colors that indicated progressively deeper states of alarm. It says here your species regularly engages in voluntary exposure to dangers for entertainment? Oh yeah. Rock climbing, skydiving, cave diving, surfing, mountain hiking. We call it fun. You have a sport where you deliberately fight each other with padded gloves until one falls unconscious? Boxing? That's pretty tame, actually. You should see rugby or hockey, or that thing in Spain where they run from bulls. Why would anyone run from bulls? For fun? Kira shrugged. Also, bulls are big and have horns and get aggressive. Running seems logical. But why are you near the bulls in the first place? Tradition. Thorax made a sound that the translator couldn't parse, probably because there was no standard galactic equivalent for existential horror mixed with administrative frustration. Do you understand, he said slowly, that by collective standards, your species is... you're built different? Kira offered. Weaponized. You're weaponized organisms walking around in casual clothes. Your baseline physical capabilities exceed our security officers. Your pain tolerance is 3 standard deviations above the collective average. Your immune system fights off pathogens that we'd classify as bioweapons. You heal from injuries that would be permanently crippling to most species. You can operate effectively in temperature ranges that span 40 degrees. You can survive for days without water, weeks without food. He stopped because Kira was smiling. Yeah, she said. We're from Earth. We're kind of tough. This changes everything. I need to contact the council. I need to review our safety protocols. I need to... Thorax spun in place, tendrils flailing. Do you have any idea what would happen if you actually tried to hurt someone? I do, actually. That's why I didn't. The students who've been harassing you. They've been bullying an apex predator. They've been provoking something that could tear them apart with its bare hands. Technically accurate, but weirdly dramatic, Kira said. Look, I get it. By your standards, I'm scary. But by my standards, I'm a 16-year-old girl who likes astrophysics and plays basketball and thinks your station's food tastes like cardboard. I'm not some monster. You broke a wall panel by throwing a Nexian. I cracked it, and I barely pushed her. Like, seriously, I've shoved my little brother harder and he just laughed and shoved me back. You guys are really fragile. That word, fragile, hung in the air. Thorax's form settled into a color that indicated resignation. I'm suspending the harassment investigation. Against you, I mean. The other students will face disciplinary action for provoking a Deathworlder. Is that what we're calling it now? It's what you are. Thorax pulled up a holographic display. The council is going to have questions. Many questions. About how a Deathworld species got this far into collective space without proper classification. About what other surprises Earth might have. About whether humanity is safe to integrate at all. Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach. Because I pushed a bully? Because you revealed that humanity has been catastrophically underestimated. There are protocols for Deathworld species, separate facilities, limited integration, controlled contact, for everyone's safety. That's segregation. That's prudence. Your species evolved to survive conditions that would kill most collective members. You have reflexes adapted for combat, strength adapted for high gravity, endurance adapted for persistence hunting. Your people. Kira interrupted. We're people. Yeah, we come from a rough neighborhood, cosmically speaking. But that doesn't make us monsters. It makes us survivors. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the collective needs more of. People who know how to survive when things get hard. Because from what I've seen, you've all gotten so comfortable in your safe little bubble that you've forgotten life isn't always safe. Thorax didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. You may be correct. But change comes slowly to the collective. For now, I'm recommending you be transferred to a separate educational track. For your safety as much as others. Because I might hurt someone? Or because they might keep trying to bully me and find out what humans are actually capable of when we stop being patient? Both. Kira stood, and even that simple movement made Thorax flinch slightly as she rose to her full height under gravity, that she barely registered. I'll save you the trouble. I'm requesting a transfer anyway. Back to Earth's educational system. I've learned a lot here, Vice Principal. But the most important lesson wasn't in any curriculum. It's that your collective, your civilized society, it's built on the assumption that nothing will ever go wrong, that threats don't exist, that survival is a concept your ancestors dealt with so you don't have to. And maybe that works in your protected corner of the galaxy. But reality is bigger and scarier and more complicated than you want to admit. And someday, you might need people who remember how to deal with that. She walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, the students who bullied me did it because they thought I was weak, because I was different, because I came from a place they considered inferior. They were wrong about all of it. But the thing is, humans. We've dealt with bullies before. We've dealt with predators and plagues and ice ages and each other. And we're still here. Still surviving, still learning, still trying to be better. That's the thing about coming from a death world. You learn that being strong isn't about dominating others. It's about surviving together. She left Thorax floating in stunned silence. News traveled fast in the Celestial Harmonics Academy. By the next morning, every student knew that the quiet Terran girl wasn't from some backwater developing world. She was from a Class 12 death world, where the air could kill you, the weather could crush you, the wildlife could eat you, and the inhabitants thought it was all perfectly normal. Kira arrived at Advanced Astrophysics to find her usual seat conspicuously empty, surrounded by a buffer zone of at least 3 meters. Students whispered and stared, but not with condescension now, with fear. Professor Zil-Inth's crystalline form flickered nervously. Ah, Miss Chen. Perhaps today you'd prefer to work independently. I'll participate in class like normal, if that's okay. Of course, of course. He turned to the board with palpable relief. Today we're discussing navigational challenges near high-gravity objects. Miss Chen, given your unique perspective, perhaps you could share insights on operating in such conditions. It was the first time any instructor had asked her opinion, as if it might be valuable rather than amusing. "Sure," she said. "On Earth, we've been calculating trajectories accounting for significant gravitational variance since before we left the planet. Your standard models work fine for collective space, where everything is stable and predictable. But if you're operating anywhere with real gravity wells, real atmospheric friction, real solar winds, basically any environment that isn't artificially controlled, you need to factor in chaos theory principles and have backup calculations for when your primary models break down." The class was silent, absorbing this. "Because on Earth," she continued, "we don't have the luxury of assuming everything will go according to plan. We plan for things to go wrong. That's just normal for us." After class, no one blocked her path. In fact, students moved aside as she walked, like a river parting around a stone. She found one person waiting by her locker, Jexith, a Talvari whose species resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a concerned librarian. He'd been in several of her classes, always polite but never particularly friendly. "Kira Chen," he said formally, using both names. "I wish to apologize." "For what?" "For my silence. I witnessed the harassment you endured. I said nothing because it seemed normal, expected, the natural order of social hierarchy." His mandibles clicked in distress. "I did not know you were from a Deathworld, but that should not have mattered. Bullying is wrong regardless of the victim's origin. I was a coward." Kira studied him. "You're apologizing now because you found out I'm dangerous?" "I'm apologizing because I realized you showed more restraint and civilization than those who called you primitive. You endured months of harassment and responded with minimal force only when physically cornered. A truly dangerous creature would have reacted much sooner, much more violently. You are not dangerous. You are disciplined. There is a difference." That was unexpected. "Thanks," Kira said. "That actually means something. I have read about Earth now. Your species' history. The conflicts, the survival, the eventual cooperation despite your violent environment. It is humbling. We collective species pride ourselves on civilization. But we achieved it easily, on worlds that barely challenged us. Humans achieved it on a planet actively trying to kill them. That is remarkable." "We're just doing our best," Kira said. "Same as anyone." "No," Jexith replied. "Not the same, better. Because your best was forged in circumstances we cannot imagine. I would like to learn from you if you're willing to teach. Before you transfer away." "Transfer?" "The administration is discussing it. Separate facilities for Deathworld species, they say." Kira felt that cold sensation again. "That's not integration. That's segregation." "I know. Many students know. We are drafting a petition. Not all collective species are as closed-minded as our administration. Some of us believe that humanity has much to teach us. About survival, about adaptation, about thriving in adversity, rather than merely avoiding it." He handed her a tablet. On it was a petition with nearly 500 signatures, almost a quarter of the student body. "We, the undersigned, believe that diversity makes the collective stronger. We request that Deathworld species be integrated fully into our academic institutions, with appropriate accommodations, but not segregation. We acknowledge that such species possess capabilities that exceed our own in certain areas, just as we possess capabilities that exceed theirs in others. True civilization is not the absence of strength, but the discipline to use strength wisely. The human student has demonstrated such discipline. We should learn from her example, not isolate her for it. Kira read it twice, something tight in her chest loosening. Jexith, this is insufficient, but it is a start. Change comes slowly to the collective, but it comes. Over the next week, things shifted. Not completely, there were still students who gave her terrified looks and wide berth. But others approached, cautiously at first, with questions. About Earth, about human capabilities, about how her species had achieved spaceflight despite their hostile environment. She told them about cooperation, about pooling knowledge, about how adversity forced creativity. She told them about human art and music and literature, all of it shaped by a species that knew death intimately and chose to create beauty anyway. She told them about the International Space Station, built by dozens of nations that had been enemies mere decades before, united by a common dream. She told them about humanity's mistakes too. The wars, the environmental damage, the prejudices and hatreds that had nearly destroyed them. She didn't sugarcoat it. "We're not perfect," she said during an impromptu gathering in the common area. Nearly 50 students had shown up, from a dozen species. Being from a death world didn't make us noble. It made us survivors. What we choose to do with that survival instinct, that's on us. Sometimes we chose wrong, really wrong. But we kept trying to do better. We're still trying. "But your planet is so dangerous," a Velnari student said, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with anxiety. "How do you sleep knowing that death could come from weather or wildlife or geological events?" "How do you sleep knowing it won't?" Kira countered gently. "I mean this seriously. You've engineered away every challenge, every risk, every chance that things might go wrong. That's gotta be boring?" "It's safe." "Sure. But safety isn't the same as living. On Earth, we've got this saying, a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. Your whole collective is a harbor, and that's fine, I guess. But don't you ever want to sail out and see what's beyond the breakwater?" Silence. Then Jexith spoke up. "My species has not produced significant innovation in 3,000 years. We maintain our technology, but we do not advance it. We have no need. Everything works. Everything is safe. Everything is stagnant." "Ours too," another student admitted. "We solve the same equations our ancestors solved. We create art that mimics what came before. We exist, but we do not grow. Humanity has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. A third student said slowly. "Yet your technology already rivals ours in several areas. Your medical science exceeds ours because you had to get very good at fixing damaged bodies. Your materials science is advancing rapidly because you needed to build structures that could withstand your planet's tantrums. Your psychology is sophisticated because you had to understand your own violent impulses to overcome them. You've been forced to innovate constantly just to survive. And you think we should make things harder for ourselves?" someone asked skeptically. "I think," Kira said carefully, "that maybe there's a middle ground between a world actively trying to kill you and a world where nothing ever goes wrong. Maybe the collective could benefit from, I don't know, challenges, voluntary ones. Not to be cruel, but to remember how to adapt, how to grow, how to be more than comfortable." "You're suggesting we invite hardship?" The skeptical student's translator dripped with disbelief. "I'm suggesting you remember you're alive." Kira stood, gathering her things. "But hey, what do I know? I'm just a primitive from a death world who thinks dodging hurricanes builds character." She said it with a smile, and several students made their species equivalent of laughter. Zixal, Quella, and Rith never approached her again. They also never returned to classes in person, opting for remote learning instead. Kira heard through the gossip network that Quella had required medical treatment for bruised ribs and psychological counseling for predator exposure trauma. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent months being called primitive, while showing more restraint than her civilized bullies. Now they were hiding from her while she tried to build bridges with the rest of the student body. Vice Principal Thurax summoned her again 2 weeks after the incident. "The council has reviewed your case," he said, his form that neutral color that meant carefully controlled emotions. "The segregation proposal has been modified. Deathworld species will be integrated into standard educational tracks, but with mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all parties and enhanced medical facilities capable of handling high-gravity species injuries." That's better than expected. Your petition helped, as did testimonials from several prominent students about the value of your perspectives. As did, he added, with what might have been reluctant respect, your consistent demonstration of restraint and judgment. You could have injured several students severely over the past months. You didn't. That spoke louder than any diplomatic argument. So I can stay? If you wish. Your transfer request to Earth system has been processed, but it's not mandatory. The choice is yours. Kira thought about it. About the comfortable, familiar education waiting on Earth, where everyone understood that surviving a Texas summer was character building and dodging Houston traffic was a daily adventure. About the uncomfortable but fascinating education here, where she was constantly challenged to explain things she'd always taken for granted. "I'll stay," she said. "At least for this term. See how it goes." Thurax's form flickered with relief. "I believe that's wise. You've become something of an unofficial ambassador for humanity. Other Deathworld species are watching Earth's integration closely. Your conduct may influence whether they seek collective membership." "No pressure, then." "Indeed. Try not to throw any more students through walls." She hit a wall, technically. I threw her toward open space. Not my fault she didn't correct her trajectory. Thurax's translator made a sound that might have been a sigh. 3 months later, Kira sat in the observation lounge watching Earth rotate slowly below the station. They'd moved to orbit her homeworld for the semester's practical studies in high-variance environment survival, a new course prompted by humanity's introduction to the collective. Jexith joined her, carrying 2 beverages in his delicate manipulator appendages. "I brought you something." The vendors finally figured out how to synthesize Earth coffee properly, or so they claim. Kira sipped it cautiously. It tasted like coffee had a distant relationship with whatever this was, but she appreciated the gesture. "Thanks. How'd the atmospheric adaptation simulation go?" "I lasted 7 minutes in Earth normal conditions before the heat and humidity triggered safety protocols." He clicked his mandibles ruefully. "Your planet is trying to murder visitors, even in simulation. Wait until you try the one with mosquitoes. The flying blood drinkers. I read about those. Why does Earth have flying blood drinkers? Because it's Earth. Everything either wants to eat you or use you as a breeding ground. Builds character." "You keep saying that. I'm beginning to understand what you mean." He settled beside her, watching Earth together. "I've been accepted to the exchange program. 6 months studying on Earth itself. Controlled environment suits, of course." "That's great. Where are you going?" "A place called Norway. They assure me it's one of the safer regions." Kira grinned. "Oh yeah, Norway's lovely. Just watch out for the fjords, the mountains, the cold, the polar bears if you go far enough north. Why do I feel you're enjoying this? Because I am. Welcome to being friends with a human. We express affection through warnings about the various things that might kill you. On most worlds, that would be a short list. On Earth, it's an encyclopedia series. You'll love it. They sat in comfortable silence, human and alien, watching the blue-green marble of a death world that had produced a species tough enough to survive it and wise enough to reach for the stars anyway. Kira Chen, Jexith said eventually. May I ask a personal question? Shoot. Your expression when they bullied you. Before you pushed Quella. I reviewed the footage. You looked sad, not angry. Why? Kira considered the question, watching clouds swirl over the Pacific. Because they thought they were better than me. They thought coming from a safe world made them superior. But really, they were just lucky. They never had to struggle, so they never learned empathy for those who do. They never had to be strong, so they mocked strength. They never had to adapt, so they feared difference. It was sad. They had every advantage, and they used it to be cruel. And now? Now some of them are learning better. You're going to Earth. Others are curious instead of contemptuous. That's not sad. That's hopeful. You're very wise for someone so young. I'm from a death world. We grow up fast. Yet you retained compassion. That's the part I find most remarkable. Your species could have evolved into pure aggression, pure survival instinct. But you didn't. You became social, cooperative, creative. You looked at a universe trying to kill you and decided to make art about it. Kira smiled. Yeah, we're sentimental like that. Below them, Earth continued its eternal rotation, storms brewing over oceans, continents sliding through tectonic conversations, volcanoes dreaming of fire, and 7 billion humans going about their day as if living on a Class 12 death world was the most normal thing in the universe. Which, for them, it was. The Andromeda Collective had spent millennia believing that civilization meant the conquest of nature, the elimination of struggle, the achievement of perfect safety. Humanity was teaching them a different lesson, that civilization meant thriving despite nature's challenges, that strength came from overcoming struggle, and that safety without purpose was just comfortable stagnation. It would take time for that lesson to sink in. The collective changed slowly, carefully, with extensive committee meetings and impact studies and philosophical debates. But it would change. Because one girl from a death world had refused to be bullied, refused to be broken, and refused to let fear dictate how species treated each other. She'd pushed back, literally and figuratively, and in doing so had pushed open a door to a new understanding. The irony was perfect, really. They'd thought she was weak because she was different. They'd learned she was strong because she was different. But the real revelation, the one still sinking in across 700 star systems, was simpler. Different wasn't inferior. Different was just different. And sometimes, different was exactly what you needed. Kira finished her not-quite coffee and stood, ready for her next class. Advanced Comparative Civilization Studies. Today's topic was Innovation Under Pressure, a case study of death world species development. She was giving the presentation. As she walked through corridors where students now nodded respectfully rather than sneering, where teachers asked her opinions rather than dismissing them, where her very presence had become a lesson in rethinking assumptions. Kira Chen from Earth, survivor of Texas summers and Houston traffic, allowed herself a small smile. They'd bullied her at school, unaware she came from a death world. Now they were learning what that really meant. And the galaxy, comfortable and complacent and utterly unprepared, was beginning its long, reluctant, necessary education in what humanity had always known. The universe doesn't care about your comfort. It doesn't owe you safety. It will challenge you, test you, maybe even break you.